Hey guys, Taste here from the Code with Taste channel. Today's topic is properties and how we can basically use them in our classes. Okay, Microsoft defines properties as a member that provides a flexible mechanism to read and write or compute the value of a private field. So why can't we just use fields in our classes? Why do we need to use properties? Well, let's give you an example or an understanding of why. Okay, so let's create a doctor class without properties. So public class doctor. Okay, and we will give this doctor class some public fields. So we'll give it public int ID, uh, public string name. Thank you, IntelliSense, and public. We don't want a string. We want a decimal, and we want it to be salary. Cool. Okay, so we have these public fields in our class to represent the doctor that to give more detail about the doctor. Okay, now any other developer using this code can new up the doctor class and assign the fields with whatever they want. So let's see that developer in action. So var doctor1 equals new doctor. Okay, I spelled that wrong. And they can say that the doctor ID is equal to 0. Okay, they can say that the doctor's name is something as an empty string, perhaps. And they can give a ridiculous salary to the doctor of 10. Oh, no. Equals nothing, basically. Actually, that's what they'll give them. Okay, so they can do this, and that's going to be okay. But what if the doctor ID can't be 0, or that the name can't be empty, or the salary can't be less than a specific value? Usually when we create classes, in our applications, they are usually driven by some sort of business requirements or logic. So for example, maybe the ID of the doctor cannot be less than 1, as we said, or the name can't be blank, or salary is in the specific range. So we can overcome this in one of two ways. One of the ways is we can make this field private, which would restrict, users from accessing these members private fields. Okay, so we can make them private. So as you can see now, it's throwing an error saying that the user can't access these fields due to its protection level. Okay, and then we can govern how these how users of the doctor class access these private fields with methods. We can expose some methods that can govern or control how these private fields are set. So let's do one for the ID. So we can say public void set ID. Okay, and that is int ID. Okay, ID, and then we can say okay, so in this case we obviously want to restrict it from being less than 1, so we can use a discard keyword there. I'll explain what that is in a future video, but basically it's a variable that we can create that we're not going to use, that we can discard off straight away. So we can say ID is greater than 0, so we're using a ternary expression here, then set we want to set the oh, actually, let me change these names to something more appropriate. ID name and salary. Okay, so we're basically saying here that if the ID is greater than 0, then we want to set the private ID to whatever was passed in. So obviously the ID that was passed in here. Okay, and if it's not greater than 0, then let's throw some sort of exception, which exceptions is a topic that I'll get to in another tutorial, but basically it's a way in C# of throwing some sort of error message. So let's throw an exception here and say print out a message saying ID cannot be less than 1. Cool. Okay, so that's one way of controlling how users use our external our private fields. Okay, so again, if a user was to use this, they wouldn't, as you saw here, they wouldn't be able to access all the private fields. So they would have to use this public method, as you can see here, set ID, and that's the only thing that's exposed to them. And if they were to set the set ID to, if they were trying to set the ID to 0, if we run the application, as you can see, it throws an exception because they can't, ID cannot be less than 1. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so that's one way of doing it, but C# provide obviously another way through properties. Okay, let's first use a property to add some business rules about the salary, for example. Okay, so let's create a property. Let's say that the rule is that you can't have a salary, or a doctor must have a salary between 100,000 to 500,000. Okay, so let's create our property. So public decimal, because salary is in decimal. We'll use a capital letter here, salary. Okay, then we open and close curly braces. Okay, and then you can see in telling us there's a get method. Okay, which is used to return the salary private field. Okay, so this method returns the private field, and then we can use a set method to set the private field. Okay, the get accessor is as it's called, returns the value of the private field, and then the set accessor can be used to perform the validation and assign a value to this private field. Okay, so with the value keyword being the value of the value that was passed into the property, basically. Okay, so let's change this up a bit to include some validation in the set method, and we can do this by we can say if so we can say if value is less than 100,000 actually, or value is greater than 500,000, then we want to throw an exception. So we're using the fail first method here. So throw new exception. And the fail first actually we want to throw an argument out of range exception. Argument out of range exception here. Okay, and we want to say name of value. Okay, and we want to throw a message saying what message could we use? The valid range is between 100,000 and 500,000. Cool. Let's new line that to make it neater. Cool. Okay, so and this is a fail first technique, which means that we don't want to go through everything in this method. You know, if our arguments aren't valid, so we want to check our arguments are valid first, and if they aren't, fail and come out of this method, and if they are, then we want to obviously set our salary to equal value. Okay, so when we go up here and try and set this salary property, we can just basically say Dr. 1 dot, and you can see there the salary property is now exposed. Okay, and we can set that. So if we set that to 0, for example, so that it's less than the required range or the business logic rules range, then we get that exception. The valid range is between 100,000 and 500,000. Perfect. Okay, so we can create the amount for our name variable as well. We can create the same for our name variable, so another property for our name variable. So let's do that. So this time public string name. Okay, and then we've got a get method which just returns name. Okay, and then we have a set method. Oops, what have I done there? Which is going to have our business logic rules, which will say if. Should we do that with an if? No, let's do that with a ternary expression. Say that we want to set the name in the scenario that the value passed in isn't null or empty. Okay, so we'll go if it's null or empty, the value that they've passed in. Okay, because the business logic rules is that you can't have a null or empty name when you new up this class. So if it's null or empty, we throw an error message. Name of value. Okay, and the error message we want to display will be name cannot be null or empty. Perfect. Cool. And then obviously we can run that up here and see what happens. So if we comment this out and go Dr. 1 dot, again the name property is exposed, but if we set it to string dot empty, which is not allowed as part of the business rules. Ooh, what have I done wrong there? What's missing here? What have I missed? Ah, okay, sorry. I haven't set the name to value. That's what I missed. Cool. So let's run that. Okay, and we get that exception because you can't, the name can't be null or empty. Great. Okay, so in C# 3, auto implemented properties were introduced. So if I need a basic member like this, so if I needed an email, for example, private I'm just going to email. What's going on here? A private string I want. Okay. And I wanted to expose this in the most basic way. So that would be a property of email. But this property simply just gets and returns email and sets, and obviously all that does is just basically And what am I doing wrong here? I need another bracket there, don't I? Okay. Cool. So this is the basic way. You just use the get, which allows us to return the email, the private variable, and then if someone wants to set that value, they can just put the value in, and it will set it to the private variable. Okay. So basically, auto implemented properties allow us to do this, what we've written down here, without the verbosity. Is there a word as verbosity? Well, without the words being so much, basically. So we can trim this all down to something like this, okay? So if I go here and I say prop, which is the Visual Studio shortcut for property, and I go string, and then I replace the name with email. This basically equates to this, okay? So where obviously I don't need to specify the field, because C# will do all that all this basically in the background, and just making it less verbose. Okay, so if I get rid of all this, I can then obviously come up here and set the email if I want, to doctor.email equals test@codewithtaste.com. Okay, and then I want to print that out. I want to get that, so I can do console.writeLine. I want to get this property and print it out to console, so I can do that by just saying doctor1.email, and that will invoke the getter method. Okay, so this invokes the setter method, and then this invokes the getter method. So when I run that, that should print that email to the console. Perfect. Cool. If I only wanted to allow the user to access the variable, I would remove the set method, which means that they can only get the variable, okay, but they wouldn't be able to access the variable to set it. As you can see there, they can only get it, okay, so this wouldn't work, okay, because there's no set variable, set method to allow it to set that property. So I can run this and this will be empty because the property hasn't been set, obviously. You can't remove the get keyword and have a set on its own. Okay, so if a property is a simple one-liner, we can use expression bodies to define them. Okay, so let's get rid of all of this code in here. Let's get rid of that, and let's get rid of all this. Cool. Okay, and if I just have a private string for first name, and a private string for last name, okay, and then I have a constructor that we can use to set the first name. String, hang on, I've done that. String first name, string surname, okay, and then I can just set that first name equals first name, and surname, last name equals, let's change that to last name. Cool. I can use an expression body format to define the getter, for example. So say we wanted to get this doctor's, set the first name and last name and then get the name of the doctor. We can do public string, which would be a name, okay, and this would be a property exposing the first name and surname. So we can do that with string interpolation and say first name underscore first name, actually underscore first name underscore last name. Yep, perfect. Okay, cool. So then when we've used that, we can just say when we new up the class, we can say var doctor2 equals new doctor, and then we can say James Bond is the doctor in this scenario. Bond. Okay, and there we go. So we've now got our doctor, and then when we want to print out the name of this doctor, we can just access that expression body property called name. Okay, and then when we run this, it should print out James Bond. Perfect. Cool. So that was the example of the getter, and when and obviously we've seen that return nicely to the console. We can also use expression bodies for both getters and setters. So obviously if I change this around a bit, so if I get rid of this constructor and just have a private string name like that, I can then obviously then beef this out a bit by having expression bodies inside of it. Get, which would return the name, private name field. Okay, like that. And then the set would obviously set whatever the value was set to that name field, like as such. And that's how we retrieve the required outcome for a getter and setter using expression bodies. Okay, finally, one more example I want to show you is using the required feature. Okay, so if you're using C#11, then you can use the required feature with your props to force users of your classes to do certain things. So for example, if I create two props here for first name and surname, props. Why am I saying props? Prop keyword, and then I create another prop keyword here. This one is string first name, and this one is string last name. Okay, cool. If I append the required keyword here, required, I need a Q, required. Let me just copy that as well, because my spelling's awful today. If I use the required keyword there, anytime anyone initializes news up this class, they will need to initialize the props as well. If they don't do that, then it won't work. Okay, so if I delete that there, if I get rid of that, and then I act like I'm going to initialize this class as such, like that, it's going to throw an error. Okay, and let's read that error. That error says required member must be set in the object initializer or attribute constructor. Okay, so we need to initialize those properties, otherwise we won't be able to new up this class successfully. So let's do that. So first name equals Holly, and then surname, or last name, sorry, equals Jones. Let's go with Jones. Okay, cool. So there we go, and now we no longer get an error message, and everything works as expected. So let's print out something to the console just to prove that this worked. We'll use string interpolation, and we can say doctor2 dot first name, and we can copy that to obviously get the last name as well. Let's see that in action. Dot last name. Cool. And when we print that to the console, we should get first name and last name printed. Brilliant. Okay, so that's a new feature in C#11. Hopefully that helps you out with your coding, and that brings us to the end of this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it and learned something new. Have a good day.